Alright, so you see tap the throttle slightly and then let off, and then it just kind of holds like it shouldn't, and then it gains a little bit, see? And then it'll hang there for a minute and you're like, I don't like this. You tap the throttle and then it'll come back down to idle. But if you're driving all around town and you keep tapping the throttle like that to get it to come down to idle, then you're going around revving your engine all the time and attracting attention with cops and everything. But that's the problem, and it is not the IAC motor. Alright guys, so as you can see in that video, the idle can hang sometimes, and like I said, it is not the IAC motor. I did a lot of research on this and found out that the 4 valves, especially the Mach 1s, can have an issue with it hanging idle as you're driving the car around. And sometimes you'll be driving and it feels like the cruise control is on. It just starts holding RPM or maybe even gaining a little, and you let the clutch in and it'll raise a little bit and hang like it was doing in that video. And that is not the IAC motor. A lot of people confuse it for the IAC motor because in the other Mustangs, even my Bullet had the problem where the IAC would get clogged up and ruined and it would make the idle hang. And so the first thing to do to figure out what's wrong with this, what I did was I started by cleaning out the IAC motor. In the end, the problem was a system that's in the computer called the dashpot system, and what it does is it gains RPM, or it keeps the RPM from dropping when you put the clutch in when you're driving the car around. So I'll get into how you can go around fixing that. You can go around the computer in this video. I'll show you how I did that. And so first though, I'm going to show you what I did to make sure it wasn't the IAC motor. So this is the IAC motor, and these cause a lot of idle issue with the car. You know, it'll hang idle, sometimes it'll be too low idle and want to stall. This just bolts onto the back here by the throttle body on the Mach 1s, and it goes, you know, on top of about the same area on the GTs and Cobras. So anyway, this Mach 1 had this weird one with this gasket with really small holes in it. I don't know if that's causing a little bit of an idle issue, so I'm going to trade it out for this one off my Cobra that's the same part and has the factory gasket, so we'll see how that does. So I tried that first. I had the stock gasket, I had the IAC off my Cobra, although the IAC off the Cobra is different because the connector for the plug is at the very top instead of the side, so it did make the harness stretch a little bit. I didn't really like that, and so I wanted to get a stock IAC for the car. But I did put it on the car and it ran fine for the first little while. See, here is the car idling nice. There we go. Nice straight idle, right where it should be. So that worked with the idle, but driving around town when the car would warm up, it would still start hanging. I drove the car down to Las Vegas. It was about 2 hours away, and as I was driving around through the city, the idle would start creeping up and hanging again. So the next step for me was to make sure that the IAC motor was clean. Alright, so you can see in there that valve that's dirty. You can see the post is silver, but the whole thing's dirty in there. That is the idle air control. That's what keeps the throttle from going back to normal. That valve will stick if it's dirty like that. So the best way to clean that out is use brake cleaner and some Q-tips and clean that all out really well, and that should fix the idle problem. Sometimes it doesn't, and you just have to buy a new one, but a lot of people get away with cleaning them. And I've heard that once you clean them, they gunk up pretty fast anyway, so we'll try this first, but I might just need to buy a new one of these. They're about $50. Alright, so there you go. It's all cleaned out. We'll see how that works. So again, with the IAC motor cleaned out, it kept having the hanging RPM, and it was not fixing it. So my next step was to go ahead and buy a brand new IAC motor just to totally eliminate the fact that it's not the IAC, and I wanted to go with a Motorcraft Ford part, so I went ahead and did that. Alright, so here's the new one. I went with the Motorcraft one. That's the part number. And the guy at the auto parts store told me that the other ones are manufactured at the same place. I'm not sure if I believe that or if it's the same quality, but I got this one on Amazon and it was a pretty good price. I'll put a link in the description, but we'll see if this fixes the problem because we're still having hanging idle even after I clean that one out. Okay, so with the IAC eliminated, it still did the problem, even with a brand new IAC on there. So with that eliminated, I did some research and I was really extremely happy to find online people had found a way around it. That's where I found out it's called the dash pot system in the computer, and that some of the Mach 1s and 4 valves have a problem with it, and that you can either tune it out with a dyno tune, have somebody tune it out, or maybe even a programmer, somebody who does handheld tunes might be able to tune it out for you. But the way that everyone else was getting around it was to make a restrictor plate for the IAC. And so what you'll see in these pictures, I went ahead and made my own. You could tell that other gasket that I had in the beginning of the video that somebody had already tried to do this, but they didn't do it right. What they need to do is you trace the gasket so you have a template to go off of, and then with that gasket you need to drill out one side completely of the IAC holes and then drill out the other side with a smaller hole, and the smallest you want to go is a 5/32, but you can go up to 9/32, somewhere in that range. So I had a 5/32 there, so I went ahead and I drilled it out, and then I just used the drill bit to auger out the hole a little bit deeper, a little bit bigger, so it would be kind of between the two. If the hole is too small, the car will stall. And what you want to do is turn on the air conditioning once you install all this back in there. That'll put some load on the engine and the RPM will drop. With this size hole, mine dropped down to about 500 RPM and then it would catch and the computer would bring it back up. So I drove it all around and it wouldn't stall at all, so I think it's in the right size with the air conditioning on and everything. So once you have the holes drilled in the template, you want the holes for the bolt holes that bolt it to the back of the intake manifold. Then you want to drill out the two holes for the IAC motor. You want one of the holes to be normal size and the other one to be slightly smaller, like I just talked about. And then you want to make sure that the gasket fits right over it and that it all lines up right. And I am not a good fabricator. I don't have tons of tools. This was something I did in my garage with some old drill bits that I had lying around that happened to be the right size. And so this is what I did with mine, and I made this custom plate for mine. So when you go back to install it onto the car, you want the small hole on the passenger side. See how that's going to go onto the back of the intake manifold. The right hole is the bigger one, it's more towards the driver's side. The smaller hole is towards the passenger side. So in this picture you can see that the new plate is on the IAC with the bolts run through it. So that's the IAC motor I'm holding behind it, and you want the plate on it like that, and then you want to slide the original gasket over that template, over that new plate, so that the stock gasket is against the intake manifold. So then you want to install this, and don't go too tight on these bolts. They strip easy into aluminum. Just get them nice and snug, and then start the car, make sure that it idles okay, make sure that the hole's not too small or it'll stall, and turn on the air conditioning, make sure that it puts some load on the engine, and you can see how it'll be. This one worked great for me. I drove the car around with air conditioning, I'd put the clutch in and RPM would quickly drop, and it takes a little bit of getting used to driving around with the RPM dropping quickly now. So be aware of that. But most of all, you want to make sure that with the engine and load and everything that the car isn't stalling. What that small hole is doing is it's going around the computer and it's making the RPM drop down to idle every time you put the clutch in. So I tested it out. The car in the driveway, after I've driven it around, after it warmed up, everything was fine. I would rev up the engine, I would do everything I needed to get the RPM to go up and then drop back down. And it seemed like the problem usually happens when you're in slight partial throttle. That's when it'll start hanging and gaining gradually. So I would slowly touch the throttle. I could get it to do this idle hang in my driveway when the car was warmed up just by slowly touching the throttle. So back in my driveway, I was trying it out. I was revving up the car slowly, and the RPM would drop every time right down to idle where it should be. Now, driving with the air conditioning off, the idle will drop, and it won't drop as drastic. With the air conditioning on, it drops down to maybe 400 or 500 RPM sometimes, and then the computer will bring it back up to 700-800 RPM where it's nice. But with the air conditioning off, it'll drop down right under 1,000 every time, and it seems to drive really well. So here's a video driving and dropping idle when I put the clutch in. So thanks for watching, everybody. On the other 4-valve cars, like the 98 Cobra, it has a little cap on top of the IAC, and there's other ways that people have gone around that. They take the cap off and put a copper one on there. I read a little bit about it, but as far as the Mach ones, and I believe the 99 Cobras go, they don't have that vacuum line on the IAC, and this is how you fix it. So hopefully this helps you. After I did all this research, I was able to learn all this. So I want to thank everybody on the forums who comes up with these things and who puts their time and effort out there and shares that with other people so we can all learn. So this is something I learned off the internet. I'm very excited about that, and I'm very thankful for the people who have gone before me and helped out with all these issues. I do want to give credit to those people because they're the ones who figured out the problems. This video hopefully will help people who are having the same issue.